the midnight call. It was nearly midnight when Jessica first heard the phone ring. She glanced at the clock on her bedside table, confused by the sudden disturbance. The old landline phone, a relic from her parents' era, was rarely used. Its shrill tone echoed through the dimly lit apartment, cutting through the peaceful silence. Jessica had no reason to pick it up. Who would be calling this late? She let it ring, assuming it was a wrong number, or perhaps someone looking for the previous tenant. But it kept ringing. A strange unease settled in her chest as she watched the phone. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, she reached out and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of curiosity mixed with annoyance. There was no response, only static on the other end. For a moment, she thought she could hear breathing, but it was so faint she couldn't be sure. After a few seconds of silence, she hung up. Jessica shook her head and returned to her bed, trying to push the unsettling call from her mind. It was probably just a prank, she thought. People did stupid things all the time, especially with old landlines that weren't properly disconnected from the previous number. The following night, it happened again. Jessica had just drifted off to sleep when the piercing ring jolted her awake. This time, it was even more unsettling because the call came exactly at midnight again. The same shrill sound filled her apartment. The same eerie silence followed when she picked up the receiver. "Hello?" she asked again, more impatient this time. Once again, nothing. Static buzzed in her ear, faint and distorted. She waited, feeling the hairs on her arms stand on end. But there was no answer. She hung up quickly and tried to go back to sleep, but it was no use. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was someone playing a prank on her? Was there some kind of glitch in the phone line? As the nights passed, the calls became a routine occurrence, each one arriving at precisely midnight. And each time there was only the same unnerving static on the other end. No voice, no explanation. By the end of the week, Jessica was exhausted. The sleepless nights and the anxiety from the mysterious calls had taken their toll. Her thoughts became erratic, constantly wondering who was behind the midnight calls. One evening, she decided to investigate. She dialed the phone company and asked if they could trace the calls. But when she mentioned the time of the calls and the static, the technician on the other end of the line went silent for a long moment before speaking again. "Are you sure it's a landline call?" he asked. "We don't have any records of incoming calls at midnight for your number." Jessica froze. "But it's happening every night." The technician hesitated. "There's no trace of those calls in our system. I'd suggest disconnecting the line temporarily just to be safe." Disconnecting the line? Jessica wasn't sure if that would solve anything, but the idea of getting rid of the phone felt oddly like giving up control. What if the calls were something more than just a prank? Still, that night, she unplugged the phone from the wall, feeling a small sense of relief. She wasn't sure if it would stop the calls, but at least she wouldn't have to hear the ringing. Yet, as midnight approached, the air in her apartment grew heavy, as if the atmosphere itself had changed. Jessica tossed and turned in her bed, trying to fall asleep, but something gnawed at her mind. It wasn't just the absence of the phone's ring, it was the suffocating silence that now filled the room. And then she heard it, the soft, unmistakable buzz of static. It was faint at first, barely audible, but as the minutes ticked by, it grew louder, filling the apartment like a whispering presence. Jessica sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at the unplugged phone. It was impossible. It couldn't be ringing if it wasn't connected. But the static was there, growing louder and more oppressive by the second. Gathering her courage, Jessica slowly got out of bed and walked over to the phone. Her hand shook as she reached out to touch the receiver. As soon as her fingers brushed it, the static cut off, leaving an eerie, ringing silence in its wake. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. It was just a phone, just a stupid old phone that wasn't even plugged in. But the feeling that something or someone was watching her was undeniable. She went back to bed, trying to calm herself, but her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. What if this wasn't just a prank? What if something far darker was happening? The following day, she confided in her friend Alyssa about the strange calls. Alyssa listened carefully, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "You've unplugged the phone, and it's still happening?" Alyssa asked, her brows furrowed. Jessica nodded. "Yeah, and now the static is louder. It feels like it's right here in the apartment." Alyssa's face paled slightly, but she tried to sound reassuring. "It's probably just some weird electrical interference, or maybe something with the wiring. Maybe you should have an electrician check it out." But Jessica could tell Alyssa didn't believe that. There was something about the way her friend glanced around, avoiding direct eye contact, that made her feel uneasy. That night, Jessica stayed awake, waiting for the static. Midnight came and went without a sound. She sighed in relief, thinking maybe it was over. But just as she was about to drift off, her phone lit up. The screen of her cell phone flashed. A call from an unknown number. With shaking hands, she picked it up. "Hello?" The same static greeted her, but this time through the phone. "Who is this?" Jessica's voice was more a plea than a question. For the first time, she heard a faint whisper through the static. "Jessica." Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just a random call anymore. Whoever, whatever was on the other end knew her name. Knew her. She slammed the phone down and stared at it, heart hammering in her chest. The next few nights were a blur of sleeplessness, static and whispers. She tried turning off her phone, but the calls persisted. Whether it was her cell phone or the landline, the static found a way through. And each time, the voice grew clearer. "Jessica, I'm here." It felt like something was closing in on her, an invisible force that wouldn't leave her alone. She even went as far as to stay at a friend's house, hoping the calls wouldn't follow her. But they did. No matter where she went, midnight brought that chilling static and the whispering voice. One night, desperate for answers, Jessica did something she had been too afraid to do before. She decided to speak back. When the call came, she answered and said, "What do you want?" There was a long silence, just static buzzing in her ear. But then, the voice came through again, soft and malevolent. "You took something from me." Jessica frowned. "What are you talking about? I don't even know you." The static hissed angrily. "You took my place." Jessica's mind raced, trying to understand the cryptic message. "I don't know what you mean." The voice grew more insistent. "You don't belong here. This was supposed to be my life." Suddenly Jessica remembered something, a faint memory from years ago, when her parents had told her about a difficult birth. How there had been complications and they hadn't been sure she would survive. But she did. Her twin, however, had not. Could this voice, this terrifying presence, be her unborn twin, haunting her from beyond the grave? Jessica's breath came in short gasps as the realization hit her. The phone, the static, the midnight calls, it was all connected to a life that had never fully formed, a sibling she had never known. "You should have died," the voice whispered, and this time it was clear, filled with rage. Jessica dropped the phone, terror coursing through her veins. She had no idea how to fight something so intangible, so deeply tied to her own existence. The next few days were spent in a frantic search for answers. She reached out to mediums, psychics, anyone who could help her understand the supernatural forces at play. One psychic, an older woman with sad eyes, told her the truth she feared. "Sometimes the dead hold grudges," the woman said quietly. "Your twin. They feel like you stole their chance at life. They're trying to reclaim it." Jessica left the psychic's house, her mind spinning. How could she stop something that wasn't alive? How could she make peace with a ghost she never knew? The calls continued, each one more threatening than the last. Jessica knew she had to do something drastic. Desperate, she planned a ritual, one that might appease the restless spirit. She gathered the necessary items, performed the ceremony, and begged for forgiveness. The calls stopped after that. For the first time in weeks, Jessica slept through the night. But as she woke the next morning, something felt different. She walked past the mirror and froze. Her reflection smiled back at her, but she wasn't smiling. Horror story too. The wrong address. Mason and Lily stood on the front steps of their new house, staring up at it with a mix of excitement and unease. It was a charming two-story home on a quiet street, nestled in a neighborhood that felt like it had been frozen in time. The trees lining the sidewalks were tall and ancient, casting long shadows over the pavement, and the houses themselves looked like they'd stood for decades, some of them likely even a century. Lily smiled as she leaned against Mason, admiring the wide porch and the intricate woodwork framing the windows. "It's perfect," she said softly. Mason smiled, though there was a twinge of uncertainty in his eyes. Yeah, perfect. They had only just moved to this small town, looking for a fresh start after years of city living. The house had been surprisingly affordable, almost too affordable, and had a bit of wear and tear, but nothing they couldn't handle. After all, they were looking for a place to call their own, somewhere to start the next chapter of their lives. As they unpacked their belongings, the first day in the new house passed without incident. It was peaceful, and by evening Mason and Lily felt good about their decision. They ordered takeout, curled up on the couch, and watched TV in the flickering glow of the screen. Then, just as the clock neared midnight, there was a knock at the door. Mason glanced at Lily, his brow furrowing. Who could that be at this hour? Lily shrugged, equally puzzled. Maybe one of the neighbors? Maybe they just want to introduce themselves. With a sigh, Mason pushed himself up from the couch and walked over to the front door. He peeked through the peephole but saw no one outside. Confused, he opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The street was empty, the air still and quiet. There wasn't a soul in sight. Strange, he muttered, turning to go back inside. But as he stepped over the threshold, his foot hit something. Looking down, Mason saw a small yellowed envelope lying on the welcome mat. It had no stamp or address, just the name James written in neat, old-fashioned handwriting across the front. Mason picked it up and studied it for a moment before calling to Lily. "Hey, did you order anything? There's a letter here." Lily came to the door, her face puzzled as she glanced at the envelope. "No, I didn't. Maybe it's for the previous owners." "Must be," Mason agreed. There was something off about the whole thing. The letter didn't look recent, it was aged and worn, like it had been left there a long time ago. They decided to set the letter aside and forget about it for the night, but as the days passed, more letters started to arrive. Each one was addressed to James, and each one was delivered without a sender. Sometimes they found them in the mailbox, sometimes on the porch, and sometimes even slipped under the front door. All without explanation. Mason and Lily tried to ignore the letters at first, assuming they were just some sort of mix-up with the address. But as the letters kept coming, they couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, Mason decided to open one of the letters. He and Lily sat together at the dining room table, the envelope in front of them, staring at it like it was some kind of forbidden object. "Should we?" Lily asked, her voice low and hesitant. Mason shrugged. "I mean, it's just a letter. Maybe it'll help us figure out what's going on." He carefully tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. The handwriting was the same neat, old-fashioned script as before, but what it said sent a chill down their spines. "James, you can't hide forever. I'll find you. I know what you did." Mason stared at the letter in disbelief. "What the hell is this?" Lily looked just as unsettled. "Do you think it's a joke? Like someone playing a prank on us?" But Mason wasn't so sure. There was something deeply unsettling about the letters, something that felt too personal to be a joke. And if it was, why had it been addressed to James? They decided to investigate further. The next day they visited the town's library to see if they could find any records about the house's history. The librarian, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Perkins, was more than happy to help. After an hour of searching through dusty archives, they found what they were looking for. The house had belonged to a man named James Calloway, who had lived there decades ago. According to the records, he had mysteriously disappeared one night and was never seen again. No one knew what had happened to him, but there had been rumors. Rumors of foul play, of secrets hidden within the walls of the house. Mason and Lily exchanged uneasy glances. It was too coincidental, too strange. Was it possible that the letters were somehow connected to James's disappearance? That night, as they lay in bed, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept thinking about the letters, about the words scrawled in that old-fashioned handwriting. "I'll find you. I know what you did." The words echoed in his mind, gnawing at his thoughts until he couldn't take it anymore. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding in his chest. "Lily," he whispered, "do you hear that?" Lily stirred beside him, groggy and confused. "Hear what?" Mason held his breath, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but silence. But then, faintly, he heard it, a soft rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere in the house. He got out of bed and grabbed a flashlight, motioning for Lily to follow him. Together they crept through the darkened halls of the house, following the sound of the tapping. It seemed to be coming from the basement. Mason hesitated at the top of the stairs. The basement was old and musty, a place they had avoided since moving in. The previous owners had used it for storage, and there were still boxes and old furniture down there, gathering dust. "Should we go down there?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. Mason nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was the right decision. "We have to find out what's going on." They descended the stairs slowly, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The tapping grew louder as they reached the bottom, echoing off the concrete walls. And then they saw it. In the far corner of the basement, hidden behind a stack of old crates, was a small wooden door. It was barely noticeable, worn and faded with age. The tapping was coming from behind it. Mason's hand shook as he reached for the door handle. He glanced at Lily, who gave him a small, nervous nod. Then, with a deep breath, he pulled the door open. Behind it was a narrow passageway, leading deeper into the earth. The walls were rough and uneven, the air damp and cold. The tapping continued, louder now, as if something or someone was trying to get out. They followed the passageway for what felt like an eternity, the sound growing more insistent with each step. Finally, they reached the end, where the passage opened into a small, hidden room. The walls were lined with shelves, and in the center of the room stood an old wooden desk. On the desk was a single yellowed letter. Mason and Lily approached the desk cautiously. Mason picked up the letter, his hands trembling. It was addressed to James Calloway, just like all the others. He opened it and read the words aloud. "James, you can't hide forever. I'm coming for you. You know what you did." Before they could react, the tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that echoed through the passageway. The air grew heavy, oppressive, and the temperature plummeted. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the room slammed shut. The growl grew louder, closer, as if whatever had been tapping was now right behind them. Mason and Lily turned to run, but something blocked their path. A shadowy figure, tall and imposing, its face obscured in darkness. The figure moved slowly toward them, its growl turning into a sinister chuckle. "You can't escape," it whispered. "Not after what James did." Mason grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward the other end of the room, but the figure was relentless, closing in on them with each step. Desperation surged through Mason. He turned to the figure and shouted, "We're not James! We don't know what he did!" The figure stopped, its shadowy form flickering like a flame. For a moment there was silence. Then, in a voice that chilled them to the bone, it whispered, "You're living in his house. His sins are now yours." The room grew darker, the air heavier, and the figure lunged toward them. Horror Story 3: The Mirror's Curse. The day Olivia found the antique mirror at a flea market, it had seemed like a stroke of luck. She'd been searching for a vintage piece to add to her collection for months, and there it was, tucked away behind stacks of old furniture and dusty knick-knacks. The mirror was ornate, framed in dark, intricately carved wood, its glass slightly tarnished with age. Yet something about it drew her in, a feeling she couldn't quite explain, like the mirror was meant for her. "How much for this?" Olivia asked, turning to the vendor, an elderly man with a crooked smile and sharp eyes. His gaze flickered to the mirror, and for a brief moment a shadow passed over his face. "That old thing? I'd let it go for $20, he said after a pause, his voice strangely tight. Olivia blinked, surprised by the low price. It was a steal for something so beautifully crafted. "Really?" she asked, feeling a pang of suspicion. $20, the man repeated. "Take it if you want it, but be careful with it." Olivia hesitated. The man's warning sounded more like a cryptic caution, but the allure of the mirror outweighed her unease. She handed him the money, and with some effort, managed to carry the heavy frame to her car. As she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror had been waiting for her, that it had been sitting there unnoticed by countless others until she came along. Her apartment was small but cozy, with an eclectic mix of furniture she'd accumulated over the years. She positioned the mirror against the wall in her bedroom, propping it up next to the window where the light would catch the glass during the day. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. Olivia would catch her reflection in the mirror as she got dressed in the mornings or glanced at herself before heading out the door. But as the week wore on, she started to notice odd things. Things that made her stomach twist with a growing sense of dread. It began with small discrepancies. She'd catch a glimpse of herself in the mirror, only to realize her reflection wasn't quite right. One morning, as she brushed her hair, she noticed that the reflection of her hand seemed to be moving out of sync with the real one, just a fraction of a second too slow. She frowned and blinked, and when she looked again, everything was back to normal. "Must be my imagination," she muttered, trying to brush it off. But over the next few days, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. Sometimes her reflection would seem to linger a moment longer after she'd moved away from the mirror, as if the image of herself was watching her leave. Other times she'd swear she saw something flicker in the glass, something that wasn't her at all. A dark shape, there for just a second, disappearing before she could fully register it. One evening, As Olivia was getting ready for bed, she stood in front of the mirror, absently brushing her teeth. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She glanced up at her reflection and her heart stopped. Her reflection wasn't brushing its teeth. Olivia froze, staring at the image in the mirror. Her reflection stood perfectly still, toothbrush in hand, but the movements had ceased. Slowly the reflection smiled, a wide, unnerving grin that didn't match Olivia's own expression. The smile was cold, calculating, and filled with malice. Olivia stumbled backward, dropping the toothbrush in shock. Her heart pounded in her chest and she blinked rapidly, hoping it was just a trick of her tired eyes. But the reflection didn't disappear. It was still there, standing in the mirror, watching her with that unsettling smile. Her throat went dry as she backed away from the mirror, her mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, maybe the result of stress or exhaustion. She hurried to bed, refusing to look at the mirror again, pulling the blankets over her head like a frightened child. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Her mind was plagued by the image of her reflection. That malicious grin burned into her memory. She kept hearing faint whispers, like the wind rustling through a distant forest, but there was no wind. The apartment was sealed tight, and she was alone. Or was she? The next morning, Olivia resolved to ignore the mirror. She was convinced it was her imagination playing tricks on her, nothing more. But even as she tried to move on with her day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time she walked past the bedroom, she caught herself glancing toward the mirror, expecting to see that unnerving reflection again. By the time evening rolled around, her nerves were frayed. She found herself sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, barely registering the noise of the show in front of her. She was too distracted by the creeping sense of dread that had settled in her chest. Finally, she decided she couldn't take it anymore. She had to do something about the mirror. Maybe it was cursed, maybe it was haunted, or maybe she was just losing her mind. Either way, she needed to get rid of it. With trembling hands, Olivia went into the bedroom and grabbed the mirror, dragging it out of the apartment and down the stairs to the curb. The mirror was heavy, and she struggled to carry it, but her desperation fueled her. She set it down on the sidewalk, far enough away from her apartment that she hoped she would never have to see it again. She returned to her apartment, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The mirror was gone. Whatever strange power it had over her was gone with it. Or so she thought. That night, as Olivia lay in bed, she felt a strange sense of unease settle over her. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the air itself had become thick and oppressive, pressing down on her. And then she heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest as she sat up in bed, listening intently. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, echoing through the apartment. It sounded like it was coming from the front door. Olivia hesitated, fear gripping her. She didn't want to open the door. She didn't want to find out what was making that sound. But the tapping persisted, growing louder, more insistent. With shaking hands, she got out of bed and crept toward the front door. She paused for a moment, steeling herself, before slowly turning the doorknob and pulling the door open. Her blood ran cold. There, standing on the other side of the threshold, was her reflection. The same malicious smile twisted across its face, eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. Olivia gasped and stumbled backward, slamming the door shut in terror. She pressed her back against it, her mind racing, heart thudding in her chest. How was this possible? The mirror was gone. The reflection shouldn't be able to follow her, but it had. A loud crash echoed through the apartment, and Olivia's heart leapt into her throat. The sound had come from the bedroom. She rushed to the door, flinging it open, only to find the antique mirror sitting in the middle of the room, its glass cracked but still intact. Olivia's stomach churned with fear. The mirror was supposed to be outside, on the curb. How had it ended up back in her apartment? She approached the mirror cautiously, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the glass. The surface felt cold, unnaturally so, and as her fingers brushed against it, a sharp, icy pain shot through her hand. She pulled her hand back, gasping in shock, and stared at the mirror in horror. Her reflection was still there, but this time it wasn't smiling. Instead, it was glaring at her with pure hatred, its eyes dark and empty. "You can't escape me," the reflection whispered, though its lips didn't move. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the room with a cold, malevolent presence. Olivia stumbled backward, her heart racing. She had to get out of the apartment. She had to get away from the mirror. But as she turned to run, the door slammed shut on its own, trapping her inside. The room grew colder, the air heavy with an oppressive force that made it hard to breathe. The reflection in the mirror began to move, stepping out of the glass and into the room with Olivia. Its form twisted and distorted, its face becoming something monstrous, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You're mine now," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. Olivia backed away, her mind racing. She had no idea how to fight something like this, something that shouldn't even exist. But as the reflection moved closer, she felt a surge of adrenaline course through her. With a scream, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and swung it at the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered on impact, shards flying in every direction. For a moment, the room was silent. The oppressive weight lifted and the reflection disappeared, leaving nothing but broken glass and splintered wood. Olivia stood there, panting, her heart racing in her chest. It was over. The mirror was destroyed. But as she turned to leave the room, she caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of her eye, something moving in the shards of broken glass. Her reflection, still smiling, still watching. Horror Story 4. The Whispers in the Woods. The small town of White Creek was nestled on the edge of a sprawling forest, a place where the trees grew so thick and tall that they blotted out the sky in parts. The locals had long told stories about the woods, dark tales passed down through generations, whispered by firelight. Most dismissed them as nothing more than superstitions. But there was one story that everyone took seriously: the legend of the Whispers. It was said that deep within the forest, there was a place where no one dared to go, a place where the trees grew so close together that the path seemed to disappear entirely. If you ventured too far, the whispers would start. They weren't loud at first, just faint murmurs carried on the wind, so soft you might mistake them for the rustling of leaves. But the further you went, the louder they became, until they filled your mind, drowning out all other sound. And once you heard them clearly, there was no turning back. The forest would claim you. Nina had heard the stories growing up. Her grandmother had been especially insistent that she stay out of the woods, warning her of the dangers lurking within. But Nina had never been one to believe in ghost stories. She was a realist, a skeptic. So when her friends Katie, Jack, and Marcus suggested they hike into the forest to prove the whispers were just a myth, Nina had shrugged and agreed. It would be fun, she thought, a way to kill time in their sleepy town. The four of them set out on a Saturday morning, armed with backpacks filled with snacks, flashlights, and a sense of invincibility. The sun was high in the sky, casting dappled light through the canopy of trees, and the air was crisp and cool. They followed a well-worn trail that led deeper into the forest, laughing and joking as they went. "How far do you think we'll have to go before the whispers start?" Katie asked, her voice tinged with excitement. "Who knows?" Marcus replied, flashing a grin. "Maybe we'll scare ourselves before we even get close." Nina chuckled, but there was a part of her that felt uneasy. She didn't believe in the legend, but there was something about the woods, something oppressive, as if the trees were watching them. She shook the feeling off, determined not to be the one who chickened out. As the hours passed, the trail became less distinct, the trees growing denser around them. The sun, once bright and warm, seemed to dim, as if the forest itself was swallowing the light. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, seemed to fade into an eerie silence. "Maybe we should turn back," Jack suggested, his voice uncertain. "Now we've come this far," Marcus said, though even he didn't sound as confident as before. "Let's just keep going a little longer." Nina glanced around, her unease growing. The forest was different here, darker, quieter. The trees seemed to press in on them from all sides, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. She opened her mouth to suggest they turn back when she heard it. A faint whisper. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was so soft, she wasn't even sure she'd heard it at first. But then it came again, barely audible, like a voice carried on the wind. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice low. The others stopped, listening intently. "I don't hear anything," Katie said after a moment. "Me neither," Jack added, though he looked uneasy. Nina frowned. The whisper had been so faint, so fleeting, but she was certain she'd heard it. She shook her head, trying to brush it off as her imagination playing tricks on her. They continued on, but the further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking overhead, casting the forest floor in shadow. The trail had long since disappeared, and they were now forging their own path through the undergrowth. And then Nina heard the whisper again, clearer this time, more distinct. It was a voice, low and soft, speaking words she couldn't quite make out. She stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. "I heard it again," she said, her voice trembling. This time the others didn't laugh it off. Katie's face paled, and Jack looked around nervously, his eyes scanning the trees. "I heard something too," Marcus admitted, his voice hushed. The group stood in silence, listening. And then the whispers came again this time. All of them heard it. It was no longer just a faint murmur. The voices were louder now, though still indistinct, as if speaking in a language they couldn't understand. "We need to get out of here," Katie said, her voice shaking. "Now." Nina nodded, her throat tight with fear. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and there was something deeply wrong about them. It felt like the forest itself was alive, the trees bending closer, as if trying to trap them. They turned to leave, but the path they had come down was gone. The forest had shifted around them, the trees now forming an impenetrable wall. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. "We have to go back the way we came," Jack said, his voice rising with fear. "We can't," Nina replied, her heart pounding. "The path is gone." The whispers grew louder, filling their ears, drowning out their thoughts. The voices seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, surrounding them, closing in. The words were still unintelligible, but the tone was clear, angry, vengeful. "We need to move!" Marcus shouted, pushing through the undergrowth. The others followed, their footsteps frantic as they tried to escape the voices that seemed to be chasing them. But no matter how far they ran, the whispers followed, growing louder, more urgent. The trees loomed over them, their branches twisting and writhing as if alive. The forest floor became uneven, the ground shifting beneath their feet as if the earth itself was trying to swallow them whole. Nina's breath came in ragged gasps as she struggled to keep up with the others. Her legs ached, and her heart felt like it was going to explode in her chest. But the whispers were relentless, pushing them forward deeper into the heart of the forest. And then, without warning, Katie screamed. Nina turned to see her friend standing frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror. Before Nina could ask what was wrong, she saw it. The thing standing just beyond the trees, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body twisted and gnarled like the trees themselves. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its mouth hung open in a grotesque grin, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. The whispers seemed to emanate from the creature, pouring from its mouth like poison. "We have to go!" Nina shouted, grabbing Katie's arm and pulling her away. But Katie was paralyzed with fear, her eyes locked on the creature. Marcus and Jack rushed to help, dragging Katie with them as they fled. The creature didn't move, but the whispers grew louder, filling their minds with dread. It felt like the air itself was suffocating them, pressing down on their lungs, making it impossible to breathe. They ran until their legs gave out, collapsing in a small clearing far from the creature. The whispers had faded, but the terror remained, lingering in the air like a thick fog. "What was that?" Jack gasped, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "I don't know," Nina replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But we need to get out of here." They tried to find their way back, but the forest had changed. The trees no longer resembled anything familiar, and the landscape seemed to shift with every step they took. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground, and the temperature had dropped sharply. As night fell, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The voices were no longer distant, they were right next to them, as if the unseen speakers were standing just inches away. The words were clearer now, though still incomprehensible, a cacophony of sound that filled their ears and minds. Katie was the first to break. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing, her hands clutching her head as if trying to block out the noise. Marcus tried to comfort her, but the whispers were too strong. They were inescapable, burrowing into their minds like a sickness. "We're not getting out of here," Katie whimpered, her voice barely audible over the whispers. "We're going to die here." "No," Nina said, though her own voice was trembling. "We're going to make it. We just have to keep moving." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The whispers were louder than ever now, a deafening roar in their ears. The creature was watching them, lurking in the shadows just beyond their vision, waiting for the moment to strike. Nina's legs were shaking, exhaustion creeping into every muscle. As she glanced at her friends, she saw the same fear etched on their faces. They couldn't outrun the whispers. The forest had claimed them, just like the legends warned. With one final desperate glance at the darkening woods, Nina whispered, "I'm sorry." And then the whispers consumed them. Horror Story 5. The final message. In a world dominated by technology, where communication was instant and constant, Anna found solace in her small rural town, far removed from the relentless noise of urban life. With her laptop and a steaming cup of tea, she had carved out a niche as a freelance writer, specializing in horror stories. Inspired by the digital age, she often explored themes of isolation, the fragility of human connection, and the dark undercurrents of social media. One crisp autumn evening, Anna sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her face as she typed. The leaves outside her window swirled in shades of orange and gold, but her thoughts were far from the beauty of nature. She was brainstorming ideas for her next story, one that would captivate her growing audience. Little did she know, her life was about to take a chilling turn. As she scrolled through her social media feeds, a notification popped up. A stranger had sent her a direct message. His profile was bare, no pictures, no friends, just a username, The Watcher. Curious, Anna opened the message. "Hi Anna, I've been following your work. I love your stories." Her heart raced. It wasn't uncommon for fans to reach out, but something about this message sent a shiver down her spine. She hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. "Thank you. I appreciate the support. How did you find my work?" The response was almost immediate. "I have my ways. You have a talent for uncovering the dark side of humanity." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. Was this some sort of joke? She quickly typed back, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. "Glad you think so. What do you like most about my stories? I enjoy how you explore the boundaries of fear and reality." It's intriguing. Something about his words sent a wave of discomfort through her. She decided to ignore the message and return to her writing. But as she tried to focus, she found herself glancing at her phone every few minutes, her heart racing each time it lit up with a notification from the Watcher. Over the next few days, the messages continued, each one more unsettling than the last. Anna tried to dismiss them as the musings of an eccentric fan, but the deeper they delved into conversation, the more unnerving it became. "Do you ever feel like someone is watching you, Anna?" one message read. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen. "What do you mean?" she typed back, her fingers trembling slightly. "Not in a creepy way, of course. Just an awareness of your surroundings. The way shadows seem to linger a little longer, the way the wind whispers secrets." "I guess I've thought about it," she replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "That's good. Awareness is key. People often overlook the signs." Anna was taken aback. There was something unsettling about his perspective. "Signs of what?" "The darkness that surrounds us. It's always there, waiting. Don't you see it?" She paused, unsure of how to respond. "I write horror stories. I'm aware of darkness. That's the beauty of it, Anna. You create a world where fear can be explored. But what if I told you that your stories are closer to reality than you think?" Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean by that?" But he didn't respond. Days turned into weeks, and the messages from the Watcher grew more cryptic. Anna's fascination morphed into dread. She found herself jumping at shadows and avoiding dark corners of her house. Each night, as she settled in to write, she felt an invisible presence looming over her. One evening, she received a message that sent chills down her spine. "I see you, Anna, right now." She froze, staring at her phone. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in around her. "What do you mean?" she typed, her heart racing. "I'm close. You might not know it, but I'm always watching. Just like you watch your characters." A wave of nausea washed over her. "This isn't funny. Stop it." Why would I stop when the game is just beginning? Panicking, Anna blocked the account and decided to take a break from her laptop. She tried to distract herself by watching television, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The shadows in her living room seemed to stretch and twist, and every creak of the old house echoed in her ears. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, sleep eluding her. The message replayed in her mind like a haunting melody. She needed to know who this person was, and more importantly, why they were targeting her. Determined to confront her fears, Anna began digging into the Watcher's online presence. Using reverse image searches and social media analysis tools, she searched for any trace of the mysterious figure. To her dismay, it was as if the Watcher existed in a digital void. There were no other accounts linked to him. No photos, no friends. The more she searched, the more frantic she became. Hours turned into days, and she began to feel as though she was spiraling into an abyss. One evening, after another long night of investigation, she received another message. "Why are you looking for me, Anna?" She felt a chill race down her spine. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" She typed back, her heart pounding. "I told you, I'm always watching. Your stories are incredible, but they can't compare to reality." "What do you mean?" "I know things about you that even you don't know. Are you sure you want to continue this conversation?" Panic surged within her. She felt like a character in one of her own horror stories, trapped in a narrative she couldn't escape. "Yes," she replied defiantly. "I'm not afraid of you." "Good. You shouldn't be. Fear only clouds judgment. I want to show you the truth." A link appeared in her messages, a URL that made her stomach churn. "What is this?" she typed. "A gift, just for you." Against her better judgment, she clicked the link. It led to a dark website filled with chilling images and stories of real-life horror. The tagline read, "True Terror, the stories that shouldn't be told." Her heart raced as she scrolled through the content. There were articles about unsolved disappearances, creepy urban legends, and disturbing photographs of crime scenes. She felt a sense of dread wash over her. Who was this person? How did they have access to such dark material? "Impressed?" the Watcher asked in a new message. "Why would you share this with me?" she typed, trembling. "Because, Anna, you need to understand that the world is filled with horrors beyond fiction. You write about them, but there's a reality to it." "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I just want you to see, to feel." Days passed and the messages continued, growing more intense. The lines between her writing and reality began to blur. Every rustle outside her window, every shadow in her home felt amplified by the lingering presence of the Watcher. Anna stopped leaving her house, fearful of the world outside. Her friends grew worried, but she brushed them off, too consumed by the escalating dread of her situation. She could hear the Watcher's voice in her head, echoing through her thoughts. "Don't you see the signs, Anna? They're everywhere." Finally, unable to take the pressure, she reached out to her best friend Emily. They had been inseparable since childhood, and Anna knew she needed to confide in someone. "Emily, I'm scared," she admitted over coffee one morning. "There's this person online. They're watching MME." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure it's not just some creepy dude? Block him and move on. It's not that simple. They know things they shouldn't know." Emily leaned forward, concern etching her features. "Like what?" Anna hesitated, her heart racing. "They know about my fears, my insecurities. They mention my past, things I've never shared with anyone." "That's terrifying, Anna. You need to go to the police." But Anna shook her head. "What can they do? It's just messages. They'll think I'm overreacting, or they might take it seriously. This is harassment. You can't just ignore it." Feeling cornered, Anna finally agreed. Together, they went to the local police station. The officer on duty listened as Anna explained her situation. After taking notes, he leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "We'll keep an eye on it, but unless he makes a physical threat, there's not much we can do." Anna felt a wave of frustration wash over her. What if he decides to escalate? What if he's closer than I think? The officer promised to log her complaint, but gave her little reassurance. As they left the station, Anna's sense of dread intensified. What if the Watcher was right? What if she was in real danger? That night, Anna locked all her windows and doors, her heart racing as she settled in for a restless sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. In the early hours of the morning, a loud knock echoed through her home. Startled, Anna shot up in bed, her heart pounding. She listened, frozen in place, as the knocking continued, urgent, insistent. Gathering her courage, she crept toward the front door, peering through the peephole. Her heart sank when she saw a figure standing in the shadows, their face obscured. "Anna!" a voice called, muffled through the door. "It's me, Emily, let me in!" Breathless, Anna unlocked the door and swung it open, relief flooding through her. "What are you doing here? I was worried about you. I couldn't sleep, so I came over. I had a bad feeling," Emily said, her eyes wide with concern. "Thank God you're here." Anna stepped back, inviting her friend inside. "I'm losing it, Emily. I feel like I'm being hunted." As they settled in the living room, Emily glanced around, her expression serious. "We need to talk about this. You can't let this person control your life." "I know," Anna replied, tears pricking at her eyes. "But what if it's too late?" Before Emily could respond, Anna's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a new message. "Guess who's back, Anna? Did you miss me?" She felt the color drain from her face as she read the words, her heart pounding in her chest. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. Determined to confront her fears, Anna decided to respond. "What do you want from me?" She typed, her fingers shaking. "Nothing more than what I've already given you. Just thought I'd check in." "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can. Because I want to show you the truth." "What truth?" "About the world we live in, the darkness lurking just beneath the surface." Anna took a deep breath, feeling her courage rise. "You're just a coward hiding behind a screen." A moment passed before a new message arrived. "A coward? Or someone who's willing to expose the truth?" "What truth?" she demanded, her voice rising in defiance. "Meet me, I'll show you." "What? No way! I'm not meeting you." Think about it, Anna. You write horror stories, but you don't truly understand fear until you face it. Panic surged through her. "I'm not interested. You might want to reconsider. It's happening tonight, whether you like it or not." Anna's heart raced as she felt the walls closing in. "What do you mean?" "I know where you live. I'll be waiting." Before she could respond, the messages stopped. The room felt suffocating, shadows dancing around them as anxiety wrapped around her like a vice. "Anna, we need to go to the police again," Emily urged, her voice laced with worry. "No," Anna replied, her voice firm. "I need to face this." "Are you crazy? This could be dangerous." "I can't live like this anymore. I need to know who they are. I can't let them control me." Reluctantly, Emily agreed, but the look in her eyes told Anna she was terrified. As night fell, Anna's resolve hardened. She donned a jacket, determination coursing through her veins. "Let's go," she said, opening the door. With every step they took toward the edge of the woods, Anna felt an unsettling mix of fear and adrenaline. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches resembling clawed hands reaching for the sky. "Are you sure about this?" Emily whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting something to jump out at them. "I have to be," Anna replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. As they approached a small clearing, a figure emerged from the shadows. Clad in dark clothing, he stood with his back to them, the moonlight casting an eerie glow around him. "Anna," he called, his voice smooth and almost melodic. "I'm glad you came." She felt a surge of anger. "Who are you? What do you want?" He turned slowly, revealing a face obscured by a mask, dark and featureless. "Just a messenger, Anna. Here to show you the truth." Anna felt her heart pound in her chest. What truth? The truth about fear. It's more than just a story, more than just words on a page. It's a reality, and you've been blind to it. As he spoke, she felt the air grow heavy with an oppressive weight. The shadows danced around them, whispering secrets she couldn't understand. You think you know horror? He continued, but you've only scratched the surface. I write horror stories, Anna shot back, her voice trembling with defiance. I know fear. No, you don't. But you will. Suddenly, the shadows shifted, and Anna felt a rush of terror. What do you mean? She shouted, taking a step back. But before he could respond, a rustling sound broke through the silence, and a figure emerged from the trees behind him, a woman, disheveled and wide-eyed, her hands trembling. Help me, she cried, stumbling forward. He's not who you think he is. The masked figure turned, his gaze piercing into Anna's soul. You should have stayed away, Anna. This is your choice. The woman looked frantic as she reached Anna, desperation in her eyes. Please, you have to listen. He's dangerous. He's been watching you, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. Anna's breath caught in her throat as fear gripped her. What do you mean? He wants to make you part of his story. You have to run. Suddenly, the masked figure lunged toward them, his movements quick and menacing. Instinct kicked in, and Anna grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her away as they bolted into the woods. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, and Anna's heart raced with terror. Don't look back, she shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. They ran deeper into the darkness, branches clawing at their clothes as they stumbled through the underbrush. Where are we going? Emily gasped, fear lacing her voice. Anywhere but here, Anna replied, her mind racing as they ran, trying to remember the path they had taken. They weaved through trees, desperation fueling their flight until they broke free from the woods and emerged onto the road leading back to town. Anna glanced over her shoulder, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. Keep running, she urged Emily, pushing herself to move faster. They finally reached the safety of the streetlights, the warm glow a stark contrast to the cold darkness of the woods. When they finally reached Anna's home, she slammed the door shut and locked it, her heart pounding in her chest. They sank onto the couch, breathless and trembling. What just happened? Emily panted, her face pale. I don't know, Anna whispered, the adrenaline beginning to fade. But we have to get out of here. As dawn broke, Anna and Emily stayed close, refusing to let the darkness invade their minds any longer. With the morning light streaming in, Anna finally felt a sense of safety, though her heart still raced at the thought of the masked figure. They spent the day planning their next steps, but Anna's mind kept returning to the Watcher. Had he been behind the figure in the woods? The thought made her stomach churn. Finally, after hours of deliberation, Anna made a decision. I'm going to write about this, she said, determination filling her voice. Write about what? Emily asked, confusion etched on her face. I'll write about what happened. I want people to know the truth. It's terrifying, but it's real. Emily nodded, though concern lingered in her eyes. Just be careful, okay? This isn't over yet. That evening, Anna sat down to write, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she poured her heart and soul into the story. She detailed every moment of terror, every feeling of being watched, every encounter with the masked figure. With each word, she felt a weight lifting. This was her truth, her story to tell. As she finished the first draft, a message lit up her phone. A familiar username, The Watcher. Did you miss me, Anna? She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She was no longer afraid. I'm done with you. You have no power over me. Power? I never wanted power. I only wanted you to see. See what? She shot back. The world around you, the horrors that lurk in the shadows. You'll always be connected to me, whether you like it or not. With a final burst of courage, Anna typed, "You don't control me. I'm telling my story and I'm not afraid anymore." "You'll regret that," he replied, and then silence fell. But Anna didn't waver. She pressed publish, sharing her story with the world. The next morning, Anna awoke to a flurry of notifications. Her story had gone viral, resonating with readers who felt the pulse of fear she had captured so vividly. Comments poured in, expressing shock, empathy, and even gratitude for shedding light on their own experiences. For the first time in weeks, Anna felt a sense of empowerment. She had taken control of her narrative, transforming her fear into something that connected her with others. But in the back of her mind, the words of The Watcher echoed like a haunting refrain. "You'll regret that." Days turned into weeks, and Anna continued to write, channeling her creativity into new stories. Yet the fear still lingered, a shadow that refused to dissipate. One night, as she was editing her latest piece, a soft ping from her phone made her heart race. "Hello, Anna. I see you've been busy. Why are you still messaging me?" She shot back, her hands trembling. "Because your story isn't finished yet. There's still so much more to uncover." "I'm not afraid of you anymore. Is that so? You may think you've conquered your fears, but the truth is, fear is everywhere. It's a part of you now." Anna stared at the screen, uncertainty gnawing at her. "What do you want from me?" "Only to show you the world beyond your door, the horrors you haven't yet faced." "Enough," Anna typed, her resolve hardening. "You don't scare me. I'll keep writing and I'll share everything." "Good luck, Anna. Just remember, some stories never end." With those final words, the screen went dark, leaving Anna with a mixture of dread and determination. Anna took a deep breath, steeling herself against the uncertainty that loomed ahead. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life any longer. Instead, she chose to embrace it, using her experiences to fuel her creativity. She began to focus on her writing, developing her characters and stories with newfound passion. With each word, she wove a tapestry of horror, creating worlds where readers could immerse themselves in fear without being trapped by it. Over time, her stories garnered attention, her audience growing as they connected with her authentic voice. Anna felt a sense of purpose blossoming within her, transforming her pain into art. But deep down, she knew the spectre of the Watcher would always linger, a reminder of the thin line between fear and creativity. As she penned her latest tale, she couldn't shake the feeling that the masked figure might return, ready to weave new horrors into her life. Yet, as she finished her piece, she smiled. For now, she was in control. The darkness may have been a part of her story, but it would never define her. She closed her laptop and took a moment to breathe, allowing the light of her success to wash over her. In that moment, Anna realized she had transformed from a victim of fear into a master of her own narrative. And with that, she opened a new document, ready to write the next chapter of her life, one where she would no longer be haunted by shadows but instead dance with them, crafting tales that resonated with the deepest corners of human experience. Weeks turned into months, and Anna's life flourished. Her stories began to take root, flourishing like flowers in a once dry landscape. Yet even in her newfound success, a twinge of anxiety pulsed in her veins. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled outside, Anna settled into her writing nook, a cup of tea in hand. The warmth of her surroundings offered comfort against the storm. She was halfway through a new draft when a notification flashed on her phone. A familiar username lit up the screen, The Watcher. "Did you think you could escape me?" Anna's heart raced as she read the message, but instead of fear, she felt something else, resolve. "I'm not afraid of you," she replied. "Fear is a part of you now, Anna. You'll always carry it. Maybe, but I'm using it to create, not to hide." "Very well, but remember, I'm always watching." As the message faded, Anna chuckled softly to herself. She had transformed her fear into something powerful, and while the Watcher remained a shadow in her life, she refused to let it overshadow her success. With a smile, she returned to her writing, ready to face whatever came next. The world was vast, filled with stories waiting to be told, and Anna was determined to uncover them all, one word at a time.